right. Today on the show, we have Shayda Torabi. Welcome, Shayda. She is a thought leader in the cannabis space, a brand new marketer, a local Austinite, and she is the host of the To Be Blunt podcast, which features discussions with various experts in the cannabis space. She is the founder of Restart CBD, one of the top CBD dispensaries in town. She's a Texas cannabis leader and public speaker. So happy to have you on, Shayda.
Oh my God. Thanks, Luis, for having me. I'm so excited to be on your podcast.
Appreciate that. So let's get right into it. I want to talk about strategic brand and business analysis, right? And most of these points, as I mentioned, are going to be just riffs on different things that have to do with you, with activating our audiences. So let's start with your superpower. You mentioned your superpower was discipline. Can you go through maybe the origins of that? Like, where did
Mm,
that superpower come from?
that is a great follow up to the question of what is my superpower. I think it's fair to kind of highlight, of course, as a business owner, as someone who owns a brand, as someone who is a personal brand, just a human in general, like motivation and finding the balance between things I have to do and things I want to do is something that everybody can, relate to some extent. Certainly, I think some people have more discipline than others. Maybe mine was first, inspired for me. I grew up as a competitive athlete. I never, competed, I would say, professionally in college by any means, but growing up, I was a swimmer. And so if you are familiar with, kind of swimming technique, it's a very intensive sport and it's a year round sport. So it's
Yeah.
not like I just played seasonally, I played year round. And I think it was that commitment of having to show up when it was cold. We swam outside. Being here in Texas, we didn't have totally covered pools. Luckily, they were heated in the winter, but I grew up swimming in my neighborhood locally and then wanted to get better at that. So I joined a club team. And so club swimming is really where I think I got that first taste of, okay, I got to show up. I have practice. I signed up for this. And I would say that it just continued to be something that I wanted to harness and really hone in as I was stepping into these different degrees of establishing my personal brand, which I think is kind of the foundation for which I then was able to build my business brand on top of and really breathe life into everything that I do from content creation to executing, my to-do lists. Again, I think when you are looking at, your day in time format, it's overwhelming to not get, sidetracked with what should be done versus what needs to be done and really trying to dissect that into what's going to move the needle the most, right? And so I
Yeah.
think always coming back to discipline being something that I understand fundamentally, okay, I might not like doing these tasks, but I know that if I do this, and I would say it's like discipline plus consistency,
Yeah.
right? So it's like showing up, I'm going to do these tasks, not because I like to do them, but because I need to do them to move this forward. And doing that every day, continuing to show up every day is really where I think that I found a little bit of that superpower of just I'm not always excited. I'm not always motivated. It's not always pleasant or positive, especially being an entrepreneur. There's a lot of grueling, unsexy things that have to get taken care of. And so it's like, how do you continue to show up through the hard times to also obviously, appreciate and celebrate the highs? But it's like you have to go through the lows and the highs to kind of, exist in that whole ecosystem. So I would say, for me, it was really just, a very apparent skill that needed to be adopted. And I wouldn't say that I perfected it, but again, it's like every day I kind of remind myself, today's your shot. What are you going to do? And you can, go this way, you can go that way. And so it's just reminding myself what direction I'm trying to go into and filling my tasks accordingly to execute on that
Yeah.
goal.
No, that makes sense, especially within the space of where there's a lot of, I think, shiny object syndrome, as we know, with everything
Yes.
that we do. There's like different flavors, I would say, of discipline as a superpower, and one of them is obviously, as you mentioned, the consistency and the discipline itself, but also what to say yes to, what to say no, how to not get kind of pulled into a lot of
It's a huge one.
specifically in content making and in like your strategies, doing it all, or again these maybe fads or ideas that seem to like work, and they might, but there is this discipline that just like the individual and the business has to apply. It's almost like a necessity to not get sucked into the mix of everything that comes with it, right?
No, 100%. I think that is, like I said, still a struggle for me because I think you articulated it great. It's that shiny object syndrome. And especially, I look at my phone, using like my phone as the example of, my content tool, my content engine. It's very easy to use that phone as a tool to make things, to have my platform, to obviously want to build on that platform, to grow, to amplify messages. But then the other side of that coin is, oh my God, I get stuck endlessly scrolling, doing comparison, things that I should be doing. And obviously, we should always want to be doing better, doing more within reason, right? Because the other side of that, I think, is burnout.
Right.
But it is constantly something of how do I leverage this to make sure that I'm, again, driving in that direction that I want to go in while not getting sidetracked by all this other junk that could detract me from my overall mission.
Yeah, and it's a lifelong journey, right? Like you said, you're nobody's perfected it, right? We're just in different phases of it. And yes, having the athletic training or having life experience sometimes, or a good teacher, sometimes trauma, sometimes, issues or workarounds that we face and then resolve are what let us see one, how much more we can take that skill, right? It
Mm.
sharpens it to its mastery level, but also that, like, as cliche as it is, like we're never done with that. Like it's an ongoing process. You're re-upping on that, whole process of getting better at it, and there's always going to be, that idea. So it's important, to obviously be graceful to ourselves while also like keeping it real. Like we can't bullshit ourselves when we're not living up to that potential. And as we know, working within the marketing and branding space, these tools have billions of dollars and very smart people behind it that know exactly what they're doing. So we have to be that much more, I think, aware, right?
Aware and adaptive too, right? Because it is so easy to get overwhelmed. I mean, obviously, right now, when you're looking at social media, I often take a cue of, okay, well, if the platform is introducing a new feature, I should learn that new feature. But I think there's also a balance when you're looking at, let's say, Instagram being like a major platform right now for content creation and brand marketing. I have friends who are photographers first and foremost. And when Reels came out, it was like, oh crap, I don't do video content. Now all of
Yeah.
a sudden I have to be animated and active. And I'm really used to creating static, beautiful, stunning imagery. And you kind of are seeing the life cycle of that a little bit expire now. Instagram is coming out and they're saying, hey, we actually realize we do want to kind of reel it back a little bit because we're realizing what a loss that was to kind of the integrity of the platform. And I think that's even an example of how Instagram as a platform even got a little bit away from its mission too. Again, wanting to continue to evolve, continuing to keep up, maintain relevancy with these new platforms like TikTok entering the marketplace, vying for our, creator attention, right? But it's proving that that was not the best, I guess, direction for them. And so it
Right.
will be really interesting to see how these tools that we use continue to evolve and then how we as these creators, these brand owners, these operators, kind of adapt to that because it is not easy to continue to have to kind of chase the shiny object. I mean, I feel like I excelled in some of that a little bit. Like I got really uncomfortable with reels in the beginning, but then I kind of use it to my advantage because I think a beauty that I have noticed about content creation lately, especially in my span of the last like 8, 10 years that I've been a content creator, you used to have the picture perfect, edit. You had to make it look super, unattainable
Mocked up. Yeah.
almost. Yeah. Now you find that the platform really resonates with raw, real, like unedited, unfiltered type of content. And so I think that was a good takeaway from just this like natural evolution of things. But it's like, how do you as a brand, respond to that, adapt to that? So you can't be ignorant. You can't be blind to these changing, I guess just like trends is probably the right word. And so it's like, how do you fit your brand into these trends, into these new features while also maintaining your integrity and your creativity? Because that's also the other end of the thread. It's like, okay, I'm really excited. I'm making videos, but obviously making videos takes a lot more energy than maybe me taking a photo and mastering some good editing. Cause again, it's
Mhm.
requiring more of my voice, my face, I mean, you see these transitions, they're crazy. I applaud these creators who have figured them out. I can't say I'm one of them.
Correct.
But it is just that constant, how do I stay relevant? Because I think the reality is you want your content to be seen by people.
Yep.
So if you don't participate in these trends or these new features, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. So it's not easy. And I guess just, to repunctuate the imperfection of just like how you look at your strategy, I think it has to evolve, it has to grow, it has to change. I'm a big proponent of whether you have the strength or the skills. Obviously, budget is a huge piece of that as well. But like, if you're not great in front of the camera or doing editing, like luckily there are people and services and solutions that you can plug and play to execute, to teach, to coach you through some of these things. And I think that's just the name of the game is like just to keep evolving, keep being on top of it and trying to, again, be consistent with it. So getting that content out there to stay on top of the messaging.
No, and that's definitely like this has been a through line, I think, with folks on this pod of integrity and that kind of adaptability, right? Because even as you beautifully put it, like if the monster that is this giant platform themselves get caught up in this shiny object syndrome, like like why would you think that you wouldn't, right? As a content creator being in the mix. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that in terms of balance and it ties to discipline too, right? Because there's a side of one for the individual, but let's shift a little bit gears and say talking about the brand. Like if you're talking to a client and maybe in terms of say some of these trends or even the discipline itself, as you say, like maybe you are disciplined to show up every day and put out a podcast every week or, put these bits out there into the ether that just with consistency, we know feeds the algorithm, obviously builds your professionalism as say a thought leader, puts your brand out there. But sometimes counterintuitively, there's other ways to leverage that. So backing up a little bit, how would you tell, or what is your, I guess, best practice for clients or brands to manage that sort of balance? Does that make sense?
It does. I guess I'll just start rambling and hopefully it answers your question. I think, balance can come a little bit by strategy. So planning things out, I think when you're getting into consistency, like having kind of a direction that you are trying to take it. So for example, and maybe this is a good example about like the imbalance of my own life between my business brand and my personal brand, which I treat my personal brand as a business to some extent, right? Like I think you have to, if you want to show up in the way that I've tried to show up in the world and contribute to the conversations that I contribute to, it's fun. And maybe for some people it works out just to be like carefree and like, oh, I'm just going to post some stuff and like see if it goes, where I want it to go. But obviously having strategy and intention is so impactful. So for Restart, especially, we have a content calendar. We know what messages that we want to put out, and that feeds from our specials, maybe that we're trying to highlight for the month. We're looking at, external events. So are there holidays? Are there, major events that are going on locally, globally, nationally that our brand can have a voice in the conversation of? Are there then things that we want to be promoting? Maybe we're doing a local collaboration or partnership with a business that we want to highlight for that month. So we're looking at all these different things that can help beat that drum in a consistent way without thinking like, oh, what am I going to make for content today? And like that from a social perspective is tied then into our brand showing up in email marketing, showing up on our website, maybe showing up in like photo shoots that we're trying to curate and coordinate. And obviously those photos then get bled into our emails, our website, our social media. And so it's like, if you don't have that strategy and that plan to really lay it out in front of you, it can be really overwhelming to figure out how I'm going to balance and plugging and playing all these, different kind of pieces of content. Versus I would say my personal brand, I have a little bit more loose, I guess, approach to it because I think the reality is the balance of me as a human, not the balance of me as a business owner or me as a personal brand. It's like, wow, that's a lot. And it's crazy when you don't have a team, obviously, to like manage it. So obviously with my business, I have a team. So we're collectively coming together. There's people and resources to support that strategy and that implementation. The Shayda personal brand, it's me, it's Shayda. And so
Yeah.
when my business takes priority, my personal brand to some extent suffers, and I maybe shoot from the hip a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, I wouldn't say that it's obviously like the best strategy, but at the same time, there is still some framework of it because my mind is thinking about that. It's like, okay, realistically, I have to have some balance as a human. And so if this falls because this is taking priority, like that's okay. And I think it's, you said it earlier too, kind of like giving yourself that grace. And
Mhm.
I think bringing it back to the humanity of it all, which I think is lost when you're thinking of building a brand and obviously a business and treating a business sometimes like a personal brand. Obviously, we as consumers, we want to relate to the brand.
Yeah.
And I think infusing that authenticity into your content where it makes sense as well is also a good way to release the pressure on yourself and maybe provide a little bit of balance where it's maybe not super shiny or polished all the time. So maybe the content is a little bit more raw. Maybe it's, you talking to the camera without, maybe the ladies out there understand like your face and makeup done. I think showing like that side of you can be a little bit uncomfortable at times, obviously. But again, building that bridge of this is me, like this is how I show up and this is how, I operate and I run things, I think can be more relatable. It's interesting. I'll use kind of like a small example. My sister and co-founder of Restart. She is a fitness creator and she is an Under Armour sponsored athlete and she's running the Austin Marathon on
Wow.
behalf of Under Armour. So super proud of her. And
Yeah.
I think, again, when people think of showing up for yourself, it's always like, oh, look at me. I'm running, my 7 miles today. Or, oh, hey, look at me. I'm crossing the finish line. She tried to run 21 miles this past weekend in preparation of the marathon.
Jeez.
And she had a fail point. Her body gave out at 18 miles and she like was recording herself just like having this breakdown. And she shared it very, authentically of like, hey, again, we always think it's the highlight reel. Look at me, I'm working out, or look at me, I'm crossing the finish line. But she was like crying. And I just saw this outpouring of people who were like, whoa, like, thanks for showing us the
Real
reality
life.
of it.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, again, that's the liberating side of the balance where we sometimes forget that that maybe is what really is going to connect with our audience compared to this idea of, oh, did I check off every event? Did I check off every, perfect photo shoot? Did I check off every perfect message? It's also like, hey, I'm human.
Yeah.
And sometimes this happened.
1,000%. And even like, if you think of a brand as they've, been described, it's like a child. We know a business requires different parts of it. And if you're running, this brand and your own brand, like that takes resources, that takes energy, that takes, there's constraints that you work within, but there's also like what you have to allocate. And the reality is, if we are to spread ourselves thin, like managing all of these brands, even say as a client that may have several offerings. If you look at the biggest companies in the world, like say your Apples, like they don't put all of their massive resources in one area. They focus on what would be the pre-purchase stage, right? Like your Apple stores is like where a lot of their investments go in. Now, we're not Apple, right? We're running our small businesses. So why, again, comparing some of these lateral like similarities, why would we think that we can invest just as heavy in the personal brand
Yeah.
and the brand? And the other part too is like with the authenticity of it, it's like that is almost the full circle approach that you really see, quote unquote, activates people, is this idea
Mhm.
that yes, we understand that the consumer is one just getting a lot more, they're aware, right? And they're even within certain spaces that we work in, we already have a savvy consumer by its nature, B2B or working with other creatives. And that's the part that if the algorithm does or doesn't pick up on how effective this authenticity is, that is what will really connect with people on a long term, and at the same time is what will help you sustain that. Because a lot of the, I think, problem and the paradox that we run into as entrepreneurs is like your sister, anybody that, or like you who's trained as an athlete, sometimes athletes need a coach to tell them to slow down, right? Because
100%.
we naturally, to stay still and to do nothing, that's our torture, right? That's sometimes the hardest thing. And so we get compensated, for better or worse, with kind of this workaholism, right? And we all go down these certain paths. So it's the same thing, I think, from an
It's a
individual
great
role.
point.
If I hear you correctly, of like how you separate and manage your own kind of sustainable stopping point, both for your brand and for your career and for your soul, right? Like how many entrepreneurs have we not heard of that reach the pinnacle of what we're quote unquote aspiring to, and what is it all for if we haven't tapped into it? And I think it's the same with brands. You can build this amazing thing which like with some sort of maybe luck or with the finances behind it or with just the perfect strategy, which is smart, it's required. But same thing, we've seen giant brands fall. You know, look at your American Apparels, look at, and again, there's multiple reasons there, but there are a lot of, I think, these same principles that to me, this is the most fascinating aspect of like marketing and branding is
Yeah.
not only are the stories and the recreating of stories like pertaining to the human, to the individual, to the team, to our audience, humans who we're trying to, you know, serve, but also the entrepreneur, that not only can you shift these stories with your communication, but within your operational process and within your work-life balance, it's the same. It can burn out a brand as much as it can burn out a person to some extent.
No, it's very true. And I think another, thing to kind of like interject into that is listening to your audience, right? And so it is this evolution. I mean, I think back to the content that I used to create, insert any, channel, personal brand, business brand, just like content has evolved over the course of my existence online. I mean, we're talking about the style of content, going from photos to reels. It's becoming more dynamic, but I think it's also becoming more authentic in the way that you need to really have. I mean, I think to me, to build a good brand is like to have that two-way dialogue with your consumer, with your audience. And so paying attention, what content is resonating. I think not being afraid to throw things out there, kind of going back to, my point with how we structure Restart a little bit. There are definitely things on our content schedule because we want to take advantage of that holiday or take advantage of that special, or because we're promoting something that we want to promote, right? But then there is some flexibility in our content that's fun or funny or silly or allows us to, just like play off of that intimate relationship that we built with our audience. And it's just remarkable what catches their attention, right? And what will like maintain their attention. So a lot of our content is very education forward. We're trying to bring them on this journey to understand, the different ways that you can leverage cannabis and hemp and CBD versus THC. But then it's also, based on what your brand is, who your brand is. Our brand is relatable. We want to be, seen as people that you could kind of, more or less call and like talk to and have a real conversation, which our customers can. They can come see us in store. They can pick up the phone. We have a chat feature on our website. And so just like treating that as this open dialogue and paying attention to what's the content they're engaging with. And then obviously like doing more of that as well. So there's the content that like I think brands need to be putting out, but then there's also the content that brands should be paying attention to. What does the consumer even want to hear? And so it's even interesting today, we were having a team meeting. We just invested in our YouTube channel. And I think YouTube is a great platform for searchability. But kind of getting into balance, with this theme, we are cranking videos out and not every video is getting the same, output as the energy and effort it's taking to like create those videos. And so we had to have a conversation today. Okay, as much fun as it is for us in theory to think, I want to have a new video every week on my YouTube channel, or for us, I think we're trying to do 2 or 3 new videos a week, which maybe is like a really large goal. But because I can see on one hand, it does feed back to my business because I'll have customers come in retail and say, hey, I saw that video you guys released. And like I mentioned earlier, I put the videos that we record on YouTube, they go in my email marketing, they go on social media. So they're multi-purpose content. But really, we were starting to look at the numbers and it's like, okay, well, maybe I should make as many videos. Maybe I should actually make more videos like the ones that are getting the most engagement, make less videos, but make more impactful videos, right? And so how do you create more of that balance, awareness, understanding, again, by listening to the customers? I mean, they're going to tell you what content they want to see, hear, engage with. And so I think that's the unfortunate, mix that we're all in. Cause I think on one end it is, throw things at the wall because you never know what the algorithm's going to respond to. So it's like, okay, well, if I don't, keep putting videos out there, who knows which one's going to take off. But then at the same time, don't spin your wheels just to spin your wheels because it makes you feel good. It's like, take some time maybe to dissect what's working, what's not working. And I guess the takeaway, which I love, making sure that what I say is like helpful to people. I never want to be like, and that's that, like, good luck. Right. But I think there is a little bit of, you have to build what that system is for you,
Hmm.
because there's not going to be a perfect mix. I can't say you got to be on these platforms, you got to do it at this frequency, you got to, make sure you're blah, 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 hitting X, Y, or Z. It's like your business, your brand is going to have its own DNA compared to my business and my brand. But I hope the takeaway is to give yourself like the space and the time to, maybe this week, while people are listening to this, like, go take 10 minutes and go look at your analytics. Like, go look at your top posts that we're engaged with. Go see what is resonating and maybe come up with, some takeaways that you can put into practice based off of what your content is actually performing, if
For
that makes
sure.
sense.
I love that. 1000%. And I mean, that's even back to almost this cliche of we know our customers supposed to be at the center and we know we need to serve them. And yet, again, rightfully so sometimes, and really like shame on us to some extent, it's like we forget that or we get
I
so
know.
overwhelmed that we don't listen. But yeah, there is this, what has helped me recently in that lane is just recognizing like bandwidth, right? Like capacity, being honest with that capacity. And as you said, there's a lot of testing and iterating, especially again because of a lot of our personalities as entrepreneurs. Sometimes we don't want to not do nothing, so we do stuff, which is great.
100%.
Action, I think, is better than inaction or paralysis analysis.
Yep.
But as you said, you need to add some reflection time into that. Otherwise, again, we fall into the habit that one, you might have not known that people were actually responsive to these YouTube videos if you wouldn't have tried it. And now that you've tried it, you can see within my bandwidth, within my capacity, and for our listeners too, within whatever resource or world or life, even if it's a exact replica of the business, there's still individuals, maybe with kids, maybe without kids, maybe with certain type of, as your industry, like you're in a different industry that requires a lot of nuance and especially changing. But when you and I met, I think a year and a half ago, right before, actually 2 years, like that was the cusp of some, I think, very weird times within the cannabis space, changing from hour to hour, it seemed.
We're
And
still in some
so
weird times.
I bet. So I mean, and that's the thing is like you have to apply
Yeah.
that same, aspect and principles as it pertains to your world. So I love that. That's a huge one. And I mean, I think on that note, I would say, how would you, for yourself, and in alignment with hearing your audience, differentiate between the efforts from, say, the operational perspective and, say, the brand perspective, right? Because we know, again, maybe as solopreneurs or within small businesses, we put a brand out there. A lot of the differentiation is this brand communication, the strategy side of it. But also, one, you have to have a good product, as we know, but the operational side is becoming more of, at least like from, say, within the entrepreneurial community, like a need, back to what we were saying as far as having a savvier customer, that you can't just put beautiful stuff out there and have the algorithmic stuff. Again, you'll spend a lot of money and you may get a good cash grab, but to sustain, how do you balance the operational side and the brand side in sync? Or, maybe how would you recommend that as best practices to other brands, taking note of it differs, right, from brand to brand?
No, it really does. That's such a great question. I will admit I'm a brand gal at heart. So I lead with brand, but I agree to the point, if you, which is funny, obviously, like I'm sure you come across this just in your line of work. And, I meet a lot of people and they think that their brand, kind of using the analogy of a baby, they think their baby is like the prettiest baby, and
Hmm.
it might be to you, that's great, but like, how does that baby actually, fly in the world, right? So it's like, what's the consumer proof of that? And so I think you can have the most beautiful brand, and I'm going to, exaggerate that with, like, maybe you got some money and you hired a really great team to make you the best logo and the best website and the best social media, and you juice it up. But if your product sucks and you haven't really thought of who your customer is, how you're going to take that product to market, how you're going to deliver on those brand values, what's the experience like for the customer, just like how the business is going to function. Um, does that automatically guarantee your brand's going to be successful? Like, no, right?
Nope.
So that is the reality of it all, which is a very hard pill for, I think, a lot of people to swallow, because they obviously, again, they love their baby and they think their baby
Mhm.
is going to sell. Um, you know, It's like, "Hey, do you have any customers?" And they're like, "No, but I just know everybody's going to love this product." Right. And so that I think is really an area for people to maybe, again, kind of in that same vein of taking some time to think through some of these questions, right? How are you going to like crawl, walk, run? And I think that that is probably the best, follow up analogy to the baby analogy of
Yeah.
looking at your business in this different stage. And so the first stage is maybe, iteration one of your brand. So, like for us, for example, I like saying I'm a brand girl, right? We did not invest a ton of money in our brand. We were launching Restart. And I will say that publicly, like over and over and over again. And I mean, like I went to a like tailormadebrands.com and paid like $15 for them to make me a logo. I went to Coolers and I picked colors that kind of aligned. I made and still do a lot of our graphics in Canva. Now, I am a marketer by trade and background and pretty tech savvy. So maybe those are easier skills for me to skate by on from a branding perspective. But the point is, don't let great be the enemy of good. And so we took that very, loose version of Restart in the early days and we launched our brand. And we're trying to figure out brick and mortar, e-commerce. What does that look like, especially in the cannabis industry at the time? It was and still is obviously tumultuous, but those early days when the industry was first opening up and we were one of the first operators in Texas. And so it was kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen next week versus next month versus next year. And so we took those early years in the crawl stage. And then as the business evolved, because we proved the concept, we delivered great customer experience. We paid attention to, at that time, we launched e-commerce first because my background is e-commerce. And then very quickly realized at the time, people did not feel comfortable buying CBD online in those early days. So we pivoted to open up a brick and mortar. And so same example, we didn't open up in like some lavish, beautiful downtown retail space. We opened up in the front of my parents' insurance agency. Like literally we took over their front office just to prove the concept. And so we've kind of taken that mentality of, I'm not going to put all my eggs in this basket. I'm going to kind of work out the operations. I'm going to work out the brand. And then when I graduate to this next level, I'm going to work out the operations. I'm going to work out the brand. And so COVID happened. That was obviously pretty shitty for a lot of businesses, especially trying to operate e-commerce in person. What does that blend look like? And so it's just been this constant, okay, we're going to take what is happening externally to us and then realize what is in our control, whether it's our staffing, it's our skill set, it's our budget, it's our resources, and really lean into, again, don't let great be the enemy of good. So like, what is good so I can move to the next level? And so now we're about to celebrate 5 years in business. And I can't say that we have it, sorted, thank you, by any means, but it's just been this constant evolution. So maybe 2 years ago, we hired an agency and they came in and they refreshed our brand. At that point, we were a 3-year-old brand. I had proved the concept. Now I can hire somebody to come in and they're going to rebuild my website. And they changed our colors a little bit. They made them a little, more I guess friendly. At the time when we launched, we picked almost like Christmas colors. And so when this agency came in, they were like, yeah, red and green, not a good look. So how about like red and tan? And we're like, yeah, that sounds great. But the point, right, is I think when you're starting out or you're kind of, looking at the resources you have access to, it's easy to want to jump to, well, man, I see all these brands, they've got their beautiful packaging. If you're in CPG being sold at Whole Foods and you want to be the next, grain-free granola bar, it's like, well, crap, I got to have the best logo. I have to have the best this, the best that. And I think it's just figuring out, well, do you have your ingredients? Do you have a good enough logo? Okay, now test that. Okay, now people like your products. Maybe now you can invest in rebranding your business. Maybe you can upgrade to the next quality of ingredients and keep like iterating from there. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think they're both equally important, but I think it's important, or it's more important to recognize what stage of the crawl, walk, run you are at and being realistic with yourself of maybe what is a need to have versus what's a nice to have. Right?
That
like you probably do need a logo, but do you need to pay a designer a large sum of money for your logo up front when you have limited budget? And maybe that money is better spent investing in your website so that you can sell direct to consumer. kind of pick your battles. And I would say like make the best investment for you to have the best chance at finding success by, getting in front of your target customer.
No, that makes total sense. And I mean, it goes back to what we've been in terms of discipline and also just listening, right? Like taking the time to, you could power through, spend all that time, all that energy. And ideally, you're taking some steps and some steps back to reflect and also some feedback from the marketplace, from your audience. You're pacing yourself in that lane, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just, again, being realistic about what is tangible and what's intangible and not getting distracted with the shiny objects, which, yes, we're all, victim to at some point in our career because we
Totally human.
we want more followers. We want more engagement. We want more sales. We want more retailers to be carrying our product. We want more opportunities to be in front of. And then I think, the other side of that is like who we think our target customer is, right?
Mhm.
And so if you don't do that work up front to actually figure out who your target customer is, it's like, kind of like the plague of marketing. When you market to everyone, you market to no one. And
Yeah.
so how do you kind of keep honing in and really refine who your target customer is, which comes through the process of what is your brand and how do you show up and all those great things that, go into building a brand. So it's obviously easier said than done, but it is part of the process. And I think anybody who finds themselves kind of in this situation, hopefully, some words of encouragement of just keep going
Trickle down.
and yeah, just like keep again, like the point of like what we're saying, right? It's like, don't stop,
Mhm.
like just keep going through it, just keep iterating, keep
Yeah.
thinking through it and testing it.
Uh-huh. And I would also add this again to pair that with the discipline of if you are a go hard person, if your brand is, or you're a brand person or an operational person, take that time to keep going with the reflective time, right? With the discipline of the work and with the discipline of, as your
For
sister
sure.
did, of really being authentic, not obviously just to the audience, but to themselves
Yeah.
and make this mission sustainable both for you and your brand. So for me, what I think a takeaway that would apply to any listener, definitely to me, and I would imagine to your brand, is that if we have a strategy and some sort of structure and the discipline, we're gonna eventually get to where we need to go. But the caveat is we need to do the same in terms of discernment to sustain that long term, both for the individual and the brand. Wouldn't you say?
No, I would agree completely. I think discernment is a great word because it's the discipline of, yes, I should be doing this every day, but am I investing the time in the right areas, right? How am I discerning then where to put my time? And I think, a point to kind of emphasize that as well as the 80/20 principle, which I'm reading that book right now. And it's just remarkable. Um, just the idea, and you see it replicated across society. It's 80% of your sales is attributed to 20% of your, customers. And so I think, again, we get overwhelmed thinking everybody is buying everything from me. And it's like, well, actually, when you look at your data, maybe how many of those are actually one-time customers versus
Mhm.
repeat customers? And it's like, where are you trying to go? Where are you trying to chase? Do you want to be sold once to 1,000 people, or do you want to be sold 10 times to 100 people?
Exactly.
And I don't think either are wrong, but when you're certainly talking about sustainability, longevity with a brand, I would
Resources.
hope, yeah, resources, absolutely. You would want to make the best investment. It's funny, I'll also share this. I used to work for a tech company called WP Engine. And if you're in Austin, I'm familiar with them. They're a managed WordPress host. And the founder, Jason Cohen, he posted something today on LinkedIn that just resonated with this topic, right? He said, it takes the same amount of resources for you to build a $10 a month product as it does for you to build a $20 a month product. But you could, I'm probably butchering some of this, but essentially, like, you could have half the like way to get to the goal, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
charging $20 versus $10, you're going to end up making more with 20, but it took you the same amount of input to get there.
Yeah.
So obviously we can't all price our products maybe in a high premium as much as we want to because we think that our product is worth that price. But it's that mentality at least resonated with me of, man, like what is going to take the same amount of energy for me to do, but actually get me farther faster? And so really like looking at that 80/20 of, okay, what are the areas that are going to get me there, whether it's tasks I do, whether it's, investments I make, whether it's looking at the data, what do my customers want? What are the products that are resonating with them? It's just like, those are some of the veins that I think as a business operationally, I'm leveraging and looking into to continue to, put my brand in the best position.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, that's the key word I think is leveraging. And that's one of, I would think my intention with the podcast as well as, with our businesses, I think is to provide leverage in terms of what is the content you're intaking, what are the hours that you as an individual, as an entrepreneur, as a business have in a day, in a week, your resources for the year, and best analyzing that input or the input versus output, right? I think that's the definition of leverage is like the input correlative to the output. You want as much of the output with as little as possible. And so back to what we were saying earlier, you can't have that if you don't take the time to step back, get off the playing field and look at the sidelines for a second and be like, what is the data, as you mentioned, saying? What is the customer saying? What is my body telling me, right? So I think that's
Huge.
that's a huge, huge takeaway. So I appreciate it, Shayda. Please let us know, where can people learn more about you? I know South by Southwest is coming up. You have an amazing talk set up. So
Thank you.
please, where can people learn more and plug into what you got going on today?
Yeah, I would say the best place to find me is LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I think it's a great platform for B2B connections. So if you're not on LinkedIn, go to LinkedIn, find me, Shayda Torabi. I'm also pretty active on Instagram. You can also type my name and find me there. And then if you ever have CBD cannabis business questions, find me at restartcbd.com. And we're a local business as well. And like I said, I'm a brand girl. I love talking about brands. So thanks for having me on the podcast. It was really a good conversation. I learned a lot.
Same pleasure, Shayda, and I will see you on the other side. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.